My name is Harper Rodriguez. I am 33 years old. When I was 15, my parents filed for bankruptcy, finalized their divorce, and found wealthier people to marry. When they packed their lives into separate moving trucks, they decided there was no room for a teenager in either of their new zip codes. I was dropped off at my Uncle Thomas's small row house in Smyrna with a blue JanSport backpack. They got into their cars, drove away, and never looked back. 16 years later, I sat across from them for the very first time. We were in a Georgetown law office. They were expecting a lucrative payout from my late uncle's estate. Instead, the lawyer looked at them and announced that Thomas had left a $2.4 million trust entirely to me. And then he mandated the unsealing of case number 417. All sound in the room vanished. Before I tell you what case 417 revealed and how it dismantled their fabricated lives, take a second to hit like and subscribe to Stillwater Stories. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are watching from right now. It reminds me that none of us are listening to these stories alone. Let me take you into that office. The room smelled of lemon polish and decaying paper. Heavy mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, soaking up the pale afternoon light. I sat on one side of a long conference table. David and Valerie sat on the other. I do not call them Mom and Dad. You earn those titles by showing up, and they lost them the day they traded me for a financial upgrade. Valerie wore a tailored wool coat that cost more than my car. David kept checking a silver watch that caught the glare of the overhead lights. They looked comfortable. They looked entitled. They refused to look in my direction. They assumed my uncle, a quiet man who drove a rusted truck his entire life, had secretly hoarded cash and left it for them to divide. The estate lawyer adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He opened a thick leather-bound folder and cleared his throat. He did not read a standard distribution of assets. He read the precise legal terms of a generation-skipping trust. $2.4 million transferred directly to me. Valerie stopped breathing. I watched her chest freeze under her expensive coat. David shifted his weight, his Italian leather shoes scraping loud and sharp against the hardwood floor. My own shoes, standard white clinic sneakers scuffed from 12-hour nursing shifts, stayed firmly planted on the rug. So. Then the lawyer turned the page. He looked directly at David. He stated that the deceased mandated the immediate unsealing of Delaware Chancery Docket 417 effective as of the reading of this will. David's hands dropped below the table. I saw his knuckles grip the edge of the mahogany so hard the skin turned stark white. Valerie's jaw locked tight. The polished, unbothered mask she wore into the building fractured right in front of me. The persistent hum of the air conditioning unit became the loudest sound in the entire building. The past they buried long ago was sitting right on the table between us. They realized in that exact second that the daughter they threw away was the one holding the shovel. 16 years ago, the sky over the Bombay Hook tidal flats hung in a bruised, heavy purple. I remember the exact shade of that sky because I spent 45 minutes staring through the passenger window of a silver sedan, watching the dark clouds press down against the desolate Delaware marshland. The damp chill of the coastal wetlands seeped right through the glass and settled deep into my bones. It was the kind of cold that a car heater can never fix because the temperature inside that vehicle had nothing to do with the weather. My mother sat in the driver's seat, keeping both hands locked firmly on the leather steering wheel. She kept the radio off. She kept the silence thick. She never once adjusted the rearview mirror to look at my face. I sat in the back seat with my knees pulled up tight against my chest, gripping the fraying nylon straps of a blue JanSport backpack. That single bag contained everything I was permitted to carry from my previous life. A few pairs of jeans, some shirts, a geometry textbook, and a plastic bag holding my toothbrush. We did not lose our family to a tragic, unforeseeable accident. My parents dismantled our lives with cold, calculated precision. David and Valerie had spent the previous 2 years running our family logistics business straight into bankruptcy court. I grew up listening to the persistent ringing of the telephone that no one would answer. I learned to recognize the heavy footsteps of debt collectors pacing on our front porch. I lay awake at night listening to the harsh, urgent arguments echoing through the thin drywall of our house. They argued about hidden accounts, missed vendor payments, and missing ledgers. But instead of facing the wreckage they created, instead of rolling up their sleeves and rebuilding the foundation, they simply chose to walk away from the mess. They filed for divorce with mechanical efficiency, treating their marriage like a failed corporate merger. They did not drown with the sinking ship. They actively secured separate lifeboats, and those lifeboats only had enough room for a single passenger. Valerie found her rescue in the arms of a local politician. He owned a vast estate in Greenville up in the wealthy northern corridor of the state, where the driveways stretch for miles and the neighbors remain hidden behind iron gates. I saw pictures of the house once. It had manicured hedges and a grand circular driveway. David orchestrated his own rapid escape by relocating to a sprawling waterfront property down south in Bethany Beach. He moved in with a wealthy widow who spent her winters in Florida and preferred her living space free from the complications of raising a teenager. My parents leveled up. They acquired new prestigious zip codes, new elite social circles, and clean, fresh starts. They shed the bankruptcy and the debt like an old winter coat. And in their brutal pursuit of upward mobility, I became the excess baggage. I did not fit the pristine, polished aesthetic of their new lives. I was a financial and social liability on their new balance sheets. The silver sedan continued rolling past the weathered bait shops and rusted highway signs lining the rural stretches of the Delmarva Peninsula. The flat terrain outside the window mirrored the vast empty space expanding inside my chest. I knew exactly where Valerie was taking me. We were heading to Uncle Thomas. He lived in a modest row house in Smyrna, a working-class town built on sweat and factory shifts. Uncle Thomas was my father's older brother, but they shared nothing beyond a last name. Thomas drove a rusted pickup truck with a cracked windshield. He worked exhausting hours at a manufacturing plant and spent his precious weekends fishing off the local piers. He never wore tailored suits. He never cared about the social hierarchy of country club memberships. He was quiet, steady, and anchored to the reality my parents were so desperate to escape. When Valerie finally turned the sedan down his narrow street, the tires crunched loudly against the loose gravel on the shoulder of the road. That sound seemed to echo off the quiet aluminum-sided houses lined up in a row. Thomas was already standing on his small concrete porch waiting for us. He wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into worn denim work boots laced tight, and he held a ceramic mug of black coffee. He did not wave as we pulled up. He just stood there watching the expensive car approach with a hard, unreadable expression etched into his weathered face. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew the cowardice his brother and sister-in-law were committing. Valerie shifted the car into park but left the engine running. The low rumble of the motor vibrated through the floorboards into the soles of my sneakers. Valerie did not turn around to face me. She kept her eyes focused straight ahead, staring blankly at the chipped white paint on my uncle's wooden mailbox. "Gather your things," she said. Her voice was flat, crisp, and entirely devoid of any tremor or hesitation. I opened the heavy car door and stepped out into the biting wind. The coastal air hit my face, smelling bitterly of low tide and decaying marsh grass. I stood on the cracked concrete walkway holding my blue backpack. I expected a grand, tearful goodbye because that is what society teaches us to expect from mothers. I waited for her to step out of the vehicle, pull me into a desperate hug, and promise me that she would come back for me once things settled down. That did not happen. Valerie simply rolled down the passenger window exactly 1 inch. She reached up and pulled her expensive wool coat tight against her neck to block out the damp chill. "Goodbye, Harper," she said, without looking in my direction. "Be good for your uncle." Then the glass glided smoothly back up, sealing her inside the quiet, climate-controlled interior of her new reality. She shifted the car into drive, the exhaust plumed white and thick, cutting through the damp, cold air. I stood on the porch next to Uncle Thomas and watched the silver sedan pull away. There was no screaming. There were no dramatic pleas echoing down the street. There was only the harsh crunch of gravel tires and the fading red glow of her taillights turning the corner and disappearing forever. Uncle Thomas placed his calloused hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, grounding weight that kept me from floating away into the freezing wind. He did not offer any empty platitudes. He did not tell me everything was going to be fine. He just opened the front door and guided me inside the small, warm house that smelled of old wood and brewing coffee. I dropped my backpack onto the hallway floor. In that quiet, ordinary space, a profound and terrible clarity washed over my 15-year-old mind. I realized that love in this family was not unconditional. Love was a budget. Love was a line item on a ledger. And when the funds ran dry, when the accounts went bankrupt, and the numbers no longer served their personal interests, my funding had just been permanently cut. The fluorescent lights of the primary care clinic in Lewis cast a sterile, unforgiving glare over examination room number 3. There are no shadows in this building to hide behind. Every surface is scrubbed stark white and smells sharply of industrial bleach, mixed with rubbing alcohol. The rhythmic, mechanical thumping of the blood pressure cuff inflating around my patient's arm serves as the only sound in the small clinical space. That steady, pulsing rhythm grounds me. It pulls my racing mind out of the memories of yesterday and anchors me firmly in the present moment. I watch the digital numbers on the monitor climb and fall. I release the valve, listening to the quiet hiss of escaping air. I am 33 years old now. I wear a pressed white coat with my name embroidered in dark blue thread above the left pocket alongside my credentials. Nurse practitioner. I spent the last 16 years of my life learning how to piece together the broken parts of other people. The man sitting on the examination table is a local commercial crabber who works the treacherous waters of the Delaware Bay. His hands rest on his denim-clad knees. They are weathered rough and mapped with deep calluses forged by decades of hauling heavy metal traps out of freezing salt water. His knuckles are swollen with severe joint inflammation, making it nearly impossible for him to close his fingers into a tight fist. I gently manipulate his wrist, feeling the rigid resistance in his cartilage. We discuss a new regimen of anti-inflammatory medications and physical therapy. I speak to him with measured, quiet respect. I know the brutal physical toll of his trade. I know men like him because Uncle Thomas was a man like him. Thomas spent his entire adult life working factory shifts with aching bones so he could put food on the table for a discarded teenager. My medical practice is an homage to the man who actually raised me. I treat the working class of Sussex County because they are my people now. My empathy was forged inside the vast hollow void my parents left behind on that gravel driveway. When David and Valerie drove away to claim their elite social statuses, they stripped me of my foundational security. I learned very early that human relationships could be abruptly terminated based on financial inconvenience, so I pursued medicine. I chose a profession governed by strict biology, predictable anatomy, and concrete science. I fix physical human trauma because I could never fix my own shattered family history. In medicine, a fractured bone can be set, a laceration can be sutured, an infection can be eradicated with the correct antibiotic protocol. The rules are clear and the outcomes are measurable. I constructed a safe, structured existence out of diagnosing problems and writing actionable treatment plans. It gave me the illusion of control over a chaotic, unpredictable world. I step out of the exam room and walk down the narrow hallway toward the nurses' station. The clinic waiting room is packed to capacity today. It smells of cheap hand sanitizer, wet wool, and damp raincoats dripping onto the linoleum floor. The heavy Atlantic fog has rolled in off Cape Henlopen, bringing a biting coastal chill that penetrates the sliding glass doors every time a new patient walks inside. My next chart belongs to a line cook from the Rehoboth Boardwalk. He is suffering from severe physical burnout and persistent respiratory issues from inhaling fryer grease for 60 hours a week during the peak summer tourist season. His forearms are crisscrossed with shiny pink burn scars from splashing hot oil. These are the injuries of survival. These are the people fighting to keep their heads above water, working grueling shifts just to make next month's rent. I sit down at the computer terminal to document the crabber's chart. The sharp, rapid click of the plastic keyboard keys creates a rhythmic drumming sound that helps mask the deep physical exhaustion settling into the base of my neck. My shoulders ache from carrying the tension of the last 24 hours. I stare at the glowing monitor typing medical codes and prescription dosages, but the letters keep blurring together on the screen. The gritty, authentic reality of this working-class clinic stands in stark, jarring contrast to the lingering memory of the Georgetown estate lawyer's office from yesterday afternoon. The scent of expensive lemon polish and decaying paper still clings to the fibers of my clothes. I keep seeing the imposing mahogany bookshelves and the smug, polished faces of my parents sitting across that polished conference table. They walked into that room expecting a quiet, effortless transfer of wealth. They expected to divide my dead uncle's assets and walk away richer without ever having to acknowledge my existence. Instead, they were hit with a legal earthquake. $2.4 million. The sheer magnitude of that number continues to rattle around inside my skull. It does not feel like a lottery windfall. It does not feel like a blessing or a sudden ticket to an easy life. It feels like a loaded weapon placed directly into my hands. Uncle Thomas lived a frugal, quiet life in a vinyl-sided row house. He drank cheap black coffee and drove a rusted truck. He never took extravagant vacations. He never bought new clothes. The revelation that he possessed a multi-million-dollar generation skipping trust defies every single piece of logic I held about the man. The money makes no sense. But the money is only half of the shock. The real threat, the element that truly fractured the composure of my parents, is the mandate tied to the inheritance. Case number 417. The words echo in my mind over and over again. When the lawyer read that specific docket number aloud, the oxygen evaporated from the room. David's knuckles turned white. Valerie's jaw locked into a rigid mask of sheer panic. Whatever is buried inside Delaware Chancery Docket 417 is powerful enough to terrify two people who have spent the last 16 years hiding behind iron gates and wealthy spouses. The mystery of that sealed file pulses in my ears. It acts as a phantom heartbeat drumming steadily beneath my stethoscope. It is a secret my uncle guarded with his life, waiting for the exact right moment to unleash it from beyond the grave. I finish typing the clinical notes and hit save. I stand up from the desk and walk over to the small sink in the corner of the station. I peel off my blue latex gloves, snapping the rubber against my wrists. I toss them into the red plastic biohazard bin, watching the lid swing shut. The sharp click of the plastic closing echoes in the quiet corridor. I turn on the faucet and scrub my hands under the scalding hot water, trying to wash away the creeping dread settling in my stomach. The quiet, structured, manageable life I painstakingly built for myself in this coastal town is standing on the edge of a precipice. The immense weight of this unexpected inheritance and the dark secrets of Case 417 are threatening to crush everything I have achieved. The past I tried so desperately to outrun has finally caught up to me, and it is demanding a reckoning. Have you ever spent your entire adult life healing the broken parts of strangers because you could not heal your own past? The shift ends, but the exhaustion does not. I push through the heavy double-glass doors of the Lewis Clinic and step out into a thick soup of coastal gray. The heavy Atlantic fog rolling off Cape Henlopen wraps around the asphalt parking lot, swallowing the street lamps and muting the distant sounds of the coastal highway. The damp cold penetrates my thin scrub jacket, immediately finding the sweat on my skin and turning it to ice. I walk toward my 10-year-old Honda Civic. The car stands as a testament to a decade of careful, rigid budgeting. It possesses a cracked passenger side mirror and a heater that takes 15 minutes to produce warm air, but it belongs to me. I purchased it with wages earned from overnight nursing rotations while my peers were taking summer vacations funded by their parents. I unlock the driver door, holding my keys tight between my knuckles, a survival habit forged from years of walking alone in dark, empty lots. Before my hand can pull the door handle, a shadowy figure steps out of the dense, swirling mist. He is a tall man wearing a rumpled tan trench coat and holding a thick manila envelope. The sudden, abrupt movement spikes my heart rate. He asks for my name. I confirm it. He thrusts the envelope hard against my chest, turns on his heel, and disappears back into the gray fog without uttering another syllable. The entire transaction takes less than 10 seconds. I slide into the driver's seat of the Civic, slamming the heavy metal door shut to lock the damp air outside. The interior of the car smells faintly of stale black coffee and old fabric upholstery. I reach up and turn on the dome light. The weak illumination casts a sickly yellow glow over the envelope sitting on my lap. The return address, printed in crisp black ink, belongs to a prominent high-priced litigation firm located in Wilmington. I rip the adhesive flap open. The thin, cheap paper of the court summons tears slightly under the tight, rigid grip of my trembling fingers. I smooth the pages out over the top of the steering wheel, forcing my tired eyes to focus on the dense, intimidating legal typography. The bold heading reads, Sussex County Register of Wills. Below that sits a formal, unyielding notice of a caveat against the will. The petitioners are listed jointly, David Rodriguez and Valerie Rodriguez. They are formally contesting the validity of Uncle Thomas's final testament. The specific grounds listed in the filing are lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. They are officially claiming in a court of law that the man who worked 50 hours a week at a manufacturing plant until the day his lungs gave out lacked the mental competence to allocate his own hard-earned assets. The sheer audacity of the claim makes the blood pound in my ears, creating a deafening, rushing sound. By filing this single legal document, my parents have triggered an automatic freeze on the entire estate. The $2.4 million trust is locked tight. The modest row house in Smyrna, where I grew up, where Thomas taught me how to budget for groceries and how to change a flat tire, is frozen. I cannot touch a single dime. I cannot even secure the physical property. The grand, satisfying reveal in the Georgetown Law Office just 24 hours ago was merely an illusion of victory. David and Valerie are wealthy enough to weaponize the legal system to starve me out. I lean my head back against the worn fabric of the headrest. The unforgiving arithmetic of the situation settles heavily over my chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. I pull my cell phone from my scrub pocket and open my banking application. The screen loads slowly, displaying my current checking account balance in stark digital numbers. $1,400. That is the sum total of my liquid assets after paying this month's rent, student loan installments, and utility bills. In the corporate legal powerhouse of Delaware, where Fortune 500 companies wage endless million-dollar battles over intellectual property, Chancery litigators do not work for charity. A competent junior attorney in Wilmington bills at $400 an hour. A senior partner demands double that rate. My parents have retained a firm that likely demanded a $50,000 retainer just to draft and file the initial paperwork. There is no magical windfall coming to rescue me from this nightmare. The $2.4 million exists only on a frozen ledger guarded by a sitting judge and an army of billable hours. The math is stark, brutal, and absolute. I have $1,400 to fight a war against two people who live in sprawling gated waterfront estates. This is exactly how wealth protects itself. It creates a financial barrier of entry so steep that ordinary working-class people simply surrender out of pure exhaustion. My parents know my financial reality perfectly well. They know I work grueling clinical shifts at a primary care facility just to stay afloat. They calculated that filing this caveat would force me to default on the legal challenge simply because I lack the capital to mount a proper defense. It is the exact same cowardly tactic they utilized 16 years ago. When their logistics business failed, they did not face their creditors or clean up the wreckage. They hired expensive bankruptcy lawyers to shield their personal assets while tossing their teenage daughter to a blue-collar uncle who lived paycheck to paycheck. They view me not as a human being, but as a nuisance, a minor clerical error they can bury under a mountain of legal filings and intimidation tactics. The damp cold from the outside fog seems to seep right through the closed car windows, settling deep into my joints. My hands are shaking, holding the torn summons. It is not just from the dropping coastal temperature. It is the physical manifestation of an ancient familiar panic rising sharp and bitter in my throat. I look at the torn summons resting on my steering wheel. To fight the people who abandoned me, I have to leverage everything I have painstakingly built over the last decade. I will have to drive to the local credit union tomorrow morning during my 30-minute lunch break. I will have to sit in a cramped gray cubicle across from a loan officer and apply for a high-interest personal loan. I will pledge my 10-year-old car, my future nursing earnings, and my pristine credit score just to secure a basic retainer for a junior attorney who might not even possess the experience to win the case. I will go into crushing debt not to buy a house or to start a business, but simply to prevent my parents from stealing the legacy of the only man who ever actually cared for me. Thomas saved every penny he had to ensure I would never have to struggle the way he did. I refuse to let them take his final act of protection and twist it into their own financial parachute. I turn the ignition key. The Honda engine sputters, protests the freezing cold, and finally turns over with a rattling hum. I crank the heat dial to the maximum setting, but only stale cold air blows through the dashboard vents. Outside the windshield, the coastal fog thickens. It swirls heavily over the hood of the car, turning the Lewis Clinic parking lot into an isolated, impenetrable island. The gray mist obscures the streetlights, trapping me inside a suffocating white void. I grip the steering wheel until my knuckles ache with the strain. They want me to panic. They want me to look at my bank account, realize the impossibility of the fight, and fold my hand. They want me to quietly disappear just like I did when I was 15, sitting in the back seat of that silver sedan watching the marshlands roll by. The realization hits me with the force of a physical blow straight to the ribs. This is not about the $2.4 million. This is about power and control. They are trying to erase me all over again. 3 days pass since the man in the trench coat materialized out of the coastal fog to hand me the Chancery summons. I spent the first morning sitting in a cramped, windowless office at the Sussex County Federal Credit Union. I placed my pristine credit score, my future nursing wages, and the title to my 10-year-old Honda Civic on a faux wood desk. The loan officer reviewed my application with tired, sympathetic eyes and approved a line of credit at an interest rate that bordered on predatory. I immediately wired the heavy retainer fee to a junior litigator named Miller, who operated out of a modest firm in Wilmington. For 72 hours, I carried a precarious, temporary sense of armor. I had secured legal representation. I had drawn a line in the sand. I returned to my clinical rotations, believing the battlefield was contained strictly within the mahogany walls of the estate court. I was wrong. The second blow lands on a Friday afternoon, and it hits with the blunt, breathless force of a physical strike to the ribs. The clinic is operating at maximum capacity. I spend the morning diagnosing a local roofer with a torn rotator cuff and managing the blood sugar levels of a retired schoolteacher. I navigate the endless demands of primary care with the practiced rhythm I have honed over a decade. Around 2 in the afternoon, the clinic administrator flags me down in the hallway. She hands me a thick, certified envelope that the mail carrier just dropped off at the front reception desk. My signature is required on the green postal receipt. The return address printed in stark black typography reads, State of Delaware Division of Professional Regulation Board of Nursing located in Dover. I carry the envelope into the staff break room. The space is narrow and smells permanently of burnt coffee grounds and microwave popcorn. I sit down at the small circular table in the corner, peeling back the rigid cardboard flap of the envelope. I unfold the official state letterhead expecting a routine audit notice or a mandatory continuing education compliance check. Instead, I read a formal notification of an anonymous complaint lodged against my medical license. The text on the page is dense, legalistic, and devastating. The complaint alleges that I utilized my prescribing authority to forge pain medication prescriptions for my Uncle Thomas during his final months of palliative care. Specifically, it accuses me of diverting Schedule II narcotics, including liquid morphine and high-dosage fentanyl patches, outside the strict boundaries of his established hospice care plan. The Board of Nursing is notifying me that a formal investigation has been initiated. If they find preliminary credibility in the anonymous allegations, they possess the authority to execute an emergency suspension of my nurse practitioner license pending a full administrative hearing. My breath catches in my throat. Uncle Thomas died of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It is a brutal, unforgiving disease that hollows a person out from the inside. During his final 6 months, the pain became a constant, agonizing presence in his small row house. He was a proud man who worked factory shifts with broken fingers just to avoid paying co-pays. He hated feeling weak. He refused hospice intervention until the very last weeks, insisting he could manage the pain with over-the-counter medication. When the suffering finally became too immense, I stepped in and coordinated his palliative care team. I meticulously documented every single dose of medication he received. I worked directly with his primary oncologist in Dover to ensure his transition was as painless and dignified as humanly possible. Caring for the man who saved my life when my parents discarded me was the most sacred duty I have ever undertaken. To see that profound act of love twisted into a malicious accusation of narcotic diversion makes the blood drain from my face. I read the stark clinical language of the complaint again. This is not a random audit. The timing is far too precise. David and Valerie filed the Chancery caveat on Tuesday. The anonymous Board of Nursing complaint arrives on Friday. They know exactly what they are doing. This is a calculated surgical strike designed to cut off my life support. My parents understand the brutal arithmetic of my survival. They know I just took out a high-interest loan to retain a lawyer. They know that my nursing license is the sole source of my income. If the medical board suspends my credentials, I cannot legally treat patients. If I cannot practice medicine, I stop earning a paycheck immediately. If the paychecks stop, I default on the loan. Miller drops me as a client due to unpaid legal fees. The caveat against the will goes uncontested. The $2.4 million trust and the row house in Smyrna default back into their waiting hands. They are engineering a scenario where I simply run out of oxygen and quietly drown. The break room walls suddenly feel intensely narrow, pressing inward toward the small circular table. The overhead fluorescent lights begin to buzz with a sharp, trapped frequency that drills directly into my temples. The sterile air in the room turns thin and inadequate. I push the chair back and stand up, needing to ground myself in a mundane physical action. I walk over to the counter where the glass coffee pot sits on the warming plate. I reach into the overhead cabinet and pull down a heavy ceramic mug. My hands are shaking. It is not a subtle tremor. My fingers are vibrating with a raw, uncontrollable adrenaline. I grip the handle of the coffee pot and lift it, but my wrist betrays me. The glass carafe tilts too far. The ceramic mug slips from my unstable grasp and plummets toward the floor. It shatters against the rigid linoleum tiles with a sharp, explosive crack. The scalding hot, dark liquid splatters across the floorboards, splashing heavily onto the pant legs of my medical scrubs. The heat seeps instantly through the thin fabric, burning my skin. I do not stand in the center of the room and deliver a defiant cinematic monologue about justice and resilience. I do not clench my jaw and vow revenge against the people who are trying to ruin me. The sheer compounding weight of the last 4 days simply breaks my knees. I drop down onto the wet linoleum floor, surrounded by the jagged shards of broken ceramic and pooling coffee. I curse softly under my breath, the sound tearing at the edges of my throat. I reach over to the metal dispenser on the wall and pull down handfuls of harsh brown paper towels. I begin scrubbing the floor, frantic and desperate, trying to soak up the mess before it spreads under the refrigerator. The rough texture of the paper scrapes against my knuckles. The harsh smell of the spilled coffee mixes with the industrial floor wax. The physical pain of the hot liquid burning my shins is sharp and grounding, but it is not enough to stop the profound terror rising in my chest. My voice cracks in the empty break room. I swallow a raw, ugly sob of sheer exhaustion, pressing the heel of my hand hard against my mouth to silence the sound. I am sitting in a puddle of ruined coffee in a clinic that might fire me by the end of the week. My parents are not just fighting for the inheritance money. They are actively, systematically dismantling the entire career I built from absolutely nothing. When they left me on that porch 16 years ago, they took my childhood. Now they are trying to take the only identity I have ever truly owned. I stare at the certified letter resting on the table above me. The paper looks innocuous, but it holds the power to erase my future. They assume I will panic. They assume I will look at the shattered pieces of my livelihood and surrender to the overwhelming pressure of their resources. I press the sodden paper towels against the floorboards, feeling the cold linoleum seep through the fabric of my scrubs. I gather the broken pieces of the ceramic mug, tossing them into the trash bin. The sharp edges cut into my thumb, drawing a small bead of dark red blood. I wash my hands in the break room sink, watching the water swirl down the metal drain. I dry my skin and pick up the Delaware Board of Nursing letter. I am terrified, and I am exhausted, but the panic is slowly beginning to harden into something cold and rigid. They left a paper trail. An anonymous complaint still requires a point of origin. If they want to drag my medical license into this war, I am going to have to find the digital footprints they left behind. I told my clinic supervisor I needed a personal morning to handle a family emergency. I did not mention the board complaint or the shattered coffee mug pooling on the break room floor. I simply changed out of my scrubs and drove south on Route 113 toward Georgetown. The Sussex County Courthouse is an imposing brick structure that attempts to project unquestionable authority, but mostly just looks tired and weathered by the coastal elements. Miller is waiting for me on the front concrete steps. He is 28 years old, wearing a dark suit that does not quite fit across his shoulders. He holds a scuffed brown leather briefcase. He looks exactly like a lawyer you hire with a high-interest credit union personal loan. But his eyes are sharp-focused, and he does not waste our limited billable time offering empty sympathy or hollow reassurances. He gives a curt nod and holds the heavy glass door open for me. We bypass the grand main courtrooms with their vaulted ceilings and polished benches. Instead, we descend a narrow concrete stairwell into the basement records division. The atmosphere down here changes instantly. The temperature drops 10 degrees, and the aging ventilation system struggles to circulate the stale trapped air. The basement smells intensely of decaying binding glue, old paper, and undisturbed dust. Rows of heavy metal filing cabinets and towering storage racks stretch out under flickering fluorescent tubes. This is where the state of Delaware buries the histories of failed businesses, broken contracts, and shattered families. The records clerk sitting behind a wire mesh security counter looks profoundly bored as Miller slides my identification and the notarized copy of my uncle's will across the worn metal surface. We are here to locate the public index entry for Chancery Docket 417. The clerk taps a lethargic sequence into an ancient computer terminal. After a long minute, she informs us that the specific docket is sealed by a judicial order originating 16 years ago. We cannot access the trial transcripts, the witness testimonies, or the deposition records. Miller anticipated this exact barrier. He does not argue with the clerk. Instead, he requests the Associated Public Filing Index and the corporate registration logs tied to the primary defendants listed in the original complaint. The clerk sighs and hands us a small plastic box containing several tight rolls of microfilm. We walk over to a secluded corner table where a bulky, outdated microfiche reader sits. The machine casts a harsh yellow light against a blank plastic screen. Miller carefully threads the film through the glass plates. The mechanical whir of the reader sounds loud and intrusive in the quiet, dusty basement. The harsh yellow glow illuminates rows of scanned historical documents. I lean in close, watching the faded black text scroll upward across the screen as Miller slowly turns the side dial. He stops the film and points a cheap plastic pen at a series of corporate filings. My parents did not just file for a standard bankruptcy 16 years ago. The scanned documents reveal a much darker and far more calculated story. David and Valerie utilized a classic Delaware corporate shield maneuver. They established a complex web of anonymous limited liability companies. Delaware is famous for allowing corporations to hide their true owners behind proxy-registered agents, making it nearly impossible to trace the flow of capital. But someone had tracked the registered agent back to a single physical address. The address belonged to a private post office box in Rehoboth Beach, rented under my mother's maiden name. Miller advances the film to the next sequence of pages. It is a civil complaint filed by a regional laborers' union. The primary charge is fiduciary malfeasance. During the final year of our family logistics business, my parents were contracted to manage the transportation logistics for a large construction project funded by the Union Pension Trust. When their own business started failing, they did not face their creditors or declare an honest bankruptcy. They siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Union Pension Fund, funneling the stolen cash through fake vendor invoices directly into those anonymous Delaware LLCs. They stole the retirement funds of roofers, pipe fitters, and heavy machinery operators. They stole from men who worked with their hands until their joints gave out. Men exactly like my Uncle Thomas. I trace the timeline on the glowing plastic screen. The dates align with terrifying precision. The bankruptcy was filed on a Tuesday. The civil lawsuit from the union was drafted, but never went to a full trial because the money had already vanished into the anonymous corporate maze, leaving the union lawyers chasing ghosts. Then my eyes land on the specific date of the LLC formation. It is stamped in bold black ink at the top of the state registration certificate. October 14th. My brain processes the date, recognizing the numbers instantly. It was exactly 3 days before Valerie packed me into the silver sedan, drove me to Smyrna, and dropped me off on that cold concrete porch. The realization hits me. There is no dramatic cinematic gasp. There is no sudden fainting spell. There is only a heavy, nauseating weight dropping straight to the bottom of my stomach. The dusty air in the archive room suddenly feels far too thick to breathe. My lungs struggle to pull in enough oxygen. I grip the edge of the laminate table, feeling the sharp plastic corner dig deep into my palm. My parents did not abandon me because they were too broke to afford a teenager. They did not leave me behind because they were overwhelmed by the crushing stress of poverty. They abandoned me because they were suddenly inexplicably wealthy and I was a dangerous liability. I was a 15-year-old girl living in the same house observing their daily habits. I would have noticed the sudden influx of cash. I would have noticed the new, expensive purchases, the sudden lack of aggressive debt collectors, the hushed phone calls to offshore accounts. A teenager is a witness. I was collateral damage in a high-stakes embezzlement scheme. They needed a clean break to execute their reinvention without any lingering eyes watching their every move. Valerie marrying the local politician and David marrying the wealthy widow were not desperate grabs for stability. They were strategic alliances designed to wash the stolen union money through legitimate, respectable channels. They sanitized their theft by marrying into old money, hiding their white-collar crimes behind country club memberships and exclusive gated driveways. Miller sits back in his metal folding chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. He looks at the glowing screen and then up at my face. He understands the brutal arithmetic of the betrayal just as clearly as I do. Uncle Thomas did not just leave me a $2.4 million trust fund. The money was never the true prize. The inheritance was a weapon. For over a decade and a half, my uncle sat in his modest row house holding the exact financial records, the unredacted ledgers, and the proof of their embezzlement. He secured the evidence of their crime, keeping it locked away in a trust that would only activate upon his death. He knew their wealthy new families would fracture and collapse if the truth ever saw the light of day. The dust motes dance in the harsh yellow beam of the microfiche reader. I stare at the names of my parents rendered in faded black ink. The puzzle pieces snap together with vicious clarity. They filed the caveat against the will and triggered the medical board investigation because they are terrified of this exact room. They are not trying to steal the money back. They are trying to keep Case 417 permanently sealed. If I gain control of the estate, I gain control of the evidence. I step away from the machine. The paralyzing fear that gripped me on the floor of the clinic break room evaporates. The cold, rigid reality of the situation takes its place. I now possess the blueprint of their destruction. The question is no longer how I will survive their attacks, but how I will dismantle the foundation they built on stolen ground. The text message arrived on my secured clinical phone just an hour after Miller and I walked out of the Georgetown courthouse. Meet me at the Smyrna Diner on Route 13. Come alone. The sender was an unsaved number, but I knew the cadence of the demand. Valerie never requested presence, she merely scheduled it. I drove north from the archives, leaving the dust of the microfiche reader behind, but carrying the heavy, undeniable truth of the LLC corporate filings in my passenger seat. The diner sits on a desolate stretch of the coastal highway, acting as a beacon for tired truck drivers and third-shift warehouse workers. I push through the heavy glass doors and the sensory assault is immediate. The air hangs thick, smelling heavily of frying grease, old burnt coffee, and the sharp sting of industrial bleach, trying and failing to mask decades of spilled meals. The erratic buzzing of a failing neon sign in the front window provides a relentless, chaotic soundtrack. I spot her instantly. Valerie sits in a cracked red vinyl booth near the back emergency exit. The contrast between her current reality and this blue-collar establishment is stark. She wears a camel-colored cashmere wrap layered over a tailored silk blouse, the kind of understated, expensive uniform favored by the elite wives of Greenville. For the past 16 years, she has reigned as the prominent spouse of a local Sussex County politician. She built a pristine public persona, hosting charity galas for clean water initiatives and attending exclusive country club luncheons. She constructed a flawless, fragile ecosystem funded entirely by stolen union pensions and protected by deliberate erasure. But the harsh, overhead fluorescent lights of the diner strip away the polish. She looks older. The expensive tailoring fails to hide a slight, persistent tremor in her hands as she picks at a greasy plate of Delaware scrapple. The crispy edges of the regional pork dish remain untouched, pushed carelessly around the ceramic plate with a dull fork. She is terrified. The pristine politician's wife is sitting in a roadside diner because the impenetrable fortress she built around her life is starting to develop deep structural cracks. I slide into the booth across from her. The sticky vinyl squeaks under my weight. I do not offer a greeting. I wait for her to play the hand she came here to deal. Valerie sets her fork down. Her manicured fingers reach into a supple designer calfskin purse resting on the seat beside her. She retrieves a small object and places it gently onto the chipped formica table, sliding it across the divide between us. It is a plastic childhood asthma inhaler. The casing is yellowed with age, the prescription label worn smooth and illegible from years of friction. It belonged to me. I used to carry it in my pocket during middle school physical education classes. I kept it. She murmurs, her voice thin and wavering. She pulls her hands back and begins tracing the thick rim of her coffee mug with her thumb. I kept it in my bedside drawer all these years. I knew we were drowning in the debt, Harper. The creditors were calling every hour. The house was in foreclosure. I thought you would be safer with Thomas. We could not take you down with us. Her eyes dart up to meet mine, brimming with unshed tears. The performance is masterful because the emotion driving it is authentic. She is not a cartoon villain plotting destruction in a dark room. She is a deeply frightened woman who made an unforgivable, cowardly choice out of pure desperation. She convinced herself over 16 years that abandoning her daughter was a noble sacrifice rather than a calculated tactical maneuver to protect her stolen wealth. The guilt radiating from her hunched shoulders is painfully real, tearing at the seams of her cashmere wrap. Before this morning, sitting in that archive basement, I might have believed the narrative. I might have looked at the yellowed inhaler and felt the ancient, desperate ache of a child wanting her mother to explain the unexplainable. I might have reached across the table and offered her the forgiveness she is silently begging to receive. But I know the specific date stamped on the LLC formation documents. October 14th, 3 days before she drove me to this exact town and left me on a concrete porch. She was not drowning in debt when she packed my bags. She was flush with embezzled union cash, plotting a clean getaway. The inhaler is not a token of maternal longing. It is a prop. It is a calculated, emotional lever pulled by a desperate woman trying to neutralize a threat to her social standing. I do not offer her absolution. I do not reach out to touch the plastic inhaler. I simply wrap my cold hands around my own ceramic mug, watching the thin wisps of steam rise from the dark, bitter coffee. The erratic buzzing of the neon sign in the window fills the prolonged, heavy silence. I lift the mug. The chipped rim presses against my lower lip, grounding me in the present physical reality. An apology delivered 16 years late, wrapped in a fabricated history, changes zero math. It does not unseal Case 417. It does not withdraw the medical board complaint threatening my nursing license. It does not erase the high-interest loan I signed just to afford a junior litigator. Valerie watches my face, searching for a softening in my posture, a crack in my composure. When she finds only cold, steady observation, the tremor in her hands stops. The unshed tears dry up instantly. The vulnerable, frightened mother vanishes, replaced by the hardened political strategist who knows a failed negotiation when she sees one. She slides the inhaler back across the table, dropping it carelessly into her expensive purse. "You are making a mistake, Harper," she says, her tone shifting from desperate to chillingly level. "Thomas was hoarding those documents to punish us, but he is dead. You cannot fight this estate battle without destroying your own life in the process. We have resources you cannot even begin to comprehend." I set my coffee mug down on the formica table. The ceramic base clunks heavily against the surface. You already deployed your resources, Valerie. You filed the caveat. You triggered the nursing board. You fired your best shots, and I am still sitting here. I slide out of the vinyl booth, standing tall over her seated form. I leave a crumpled $5 bill on the table to cover my black coffee. I walk out of the diner, pushing through the glass doors into the cold coastal wind, leaving her alone in the harsh fluorescent glare. The emotional manipulation failed, but the tactical war is far from over. Valerie played the maternal card and lost. That means the other half of this broken equation will deploy a different strategy. My phone vibrates in my scrub pocket the moment I turn the key in my Honda Civic ignition. A local weather alert flashes across the screen, warning of a severe coastal rainstorm moving rapidly across the Delmarva Peninsula. Beneath the weather warning sits a new text message. This one is from David. The message does not ask for a meeting. It states a location. He is waiting outside a Wawa convenience store on my route home, and the tone of his demand signals that the bribes are about to replace the tears. The local weather alert flashing across my phone screen severely underestimated the velocity of the coastal storm. By the time I navigate my Honda Civic out of Smyrna and merge onto the highway, the sky breaks open. A driving rainstorm hammers the windshield with punishing force. The worn wiper blades squeak and drag across the glass, failing to clear the torrential sheets of water pouring down from the bruised clouds. I squint through the watery blur, gripping the steering wheel tight as the tires struggle to maintain traction on the slick asphalt. The Delmarva Peninsula transforms into a chaotic, flooded landscape. I spot the glowing red and yellow neon sign of a Wawa convenience store radiating through the gloom like a solitary lighthouse. I pull into the sprawling parking lot, steering away from the crowded gas pumps, and park under the dim glow of a peripheral street lamp. I shift the car into park, leaving the engine running to keep the weak heater blowing against my frozen ankles. I do not have to wait long. A dark luxury SUV idles 2 rows away, its headlights cutting sharp beams through the heavy downpour. The driver's side door opens and a figure steps out into the deluge. He does not bother with an umbrella. He walks straight through the deep puddles, marching toward my 10-year-old vehicle with urgent, frantic strides. The latch on my passenger side clicks and the door is wrenched open. A sudden gust of freezing wind and sideways rain invades the small cabin, instantly chilling the stale air. David slides into the passenger seat, slamming the heavy metal door shut behind him. He brings the overwhelming smell of damp wool, stale tobacco, and undeniable desperation into my confined sanctuary. For a long moment, neither of us speaks. The rhythmic thrumming of the rain striking the metal roof fills the tight space. I study the man sitting inches away from me. David looks nothing like the composed, arrogant figure who sat in the Georgetown estate office 24 hours ago. The harsh white glare of the gas station canopy lights reflects off his rain-slicked face, illuminating deep, exhausted lines etched around his mouth. His expensive tailored overcoat is soaked through, weighing heavy on his shoulders. He breathes in shallow, rapid bursts, fogging up the cold glass of the passenger window. He is a man standing on the edge of a sheer cliff, staring down at a fatal drop. David married into generational Sussex County wealth. His current wife is a prominent widow residing in a sprawling waterfront property down in Bethany Beach. Her family built their fortune on decades of lucrative coastal real estate development, and their surname carries immense political and social capital across the southern resort towns. David did not bring equal value to that union. He arrived 16 years ago as a failed logistics manager with a suspiciously timed windfall. He is a kept man. He drives vehicles leased under her family trust and attends elite charity dinners purely by virtue of being her +1. His entire identity is a fragile house of cards built on her pristine reputation. If the Bethany Beach elite discover that her husband is a white-collar criminal who embezzled local union pensions, the ensuing scandal would obliterate her social standing. She would sever ties with him in a heartbeat, casting him back out into the cold with nothing but the clothes on his back. He reaches a trembling hand inside the breast pocket of his wet overcoat. He retrieves a folded piece of paper and tosses it onto the cracked plastic dashboard. The pale blue slip lands right next to the defrost vent. It is a personal cashier check. The numbers written in precise dark ink jump out in the dim cabin light. $100,000. The sheer insulting absurdity of the amount hangs in the damp air between us. He is attempting to purchase my exit from a $2.4 million estate dispute with pocket change sourced from a private slush fund. "Walk away from the estate, Harper," he says, his voice strained and gravelly, fighting to be heard over the relentless drumming of the storm. "Let the caveat stand. Do not contest the filing." I look down at the wet, crumpled check. The edges of the thick paper are already curling from the humidity inside the car. I do not touch it. "You followed me from the archives to buy me off," I state, keeping my tone flat and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "You and Valerie filed a legal challenge claiming Uncle Thomas was mentally incompetent, and now you are tossing a check on my dashboard to make the problem vanish." "You do not understand how these corporate structures work," he replies, dragging a hand down his wet face. "The LLCs from Case 417 are a tangled mess. If that docket becomes a matter of public record, the financial journalists will trace the registered agents. The exposure will completely ruin my wife's family name in Bethany. Her brothers sit on the local zoning board. They will crucify me, Harper. They will freeze my accounts and throw me out of the house. I will lose everything." His plea reveals the precise architecture of his panic. He does not express a single ounce of remorse for abandoning his teenage daughter. He does not mention the staggering theft of the union retirement funds. He does not even acknowledge the anonymous medical board complaint that threatens to destroy my nursing career. He is entirely consumed by the terror of losing his comfortable fabricated life. He is asking the daughter he discarded to sacrifice her own financial security and professional livelihood simply to shield his wealthy wife from social embarrassment. I point a finger at the pale blue check. Valerie tried to play the grieving mother at the diner, offering me a plastic inhaler. Now you are offering me a fraction of what my uncle left me. You both think I am a naive 15-year-old girl sitting on the porch waiting for you to come back. But you are missing the most important variable in this equation, David. I am a licensed medical professional, and your caveat was followed immediately by a board complaint attempting to strip my credentials. David blinks, rainwater dripping from his graying hair onto the dark upholstery. His brow furrows in genuine confusion. "What board complaint? I do not know anything about a medical license challenge. We only filed the estate injunction." His reaction is a microsecond of unguarded truth. He is not feigning ignorance. The confusion mapping his features is authentic. The tactical alliance between my parents possesses a fundamental flaw. They are not coordinating their attacks. Valerie initiated the anonymous strike against my nursing license independently, utilizing her own vindictive logic without consulting him. They are two desperate individuals throwing separate punches, hoping something eventually knocks me down. The revelation provides me with a crucial structural weakness to exploit later. I pick up the damp check from the dashboard. The paper feels heavy and cheap in my fingers. I hold it out toward his chest. "I am not walking away from Thomas." I tell him, my voice slicing through the thick, stale air of the cabin. "He spent 16 years guarding the evidence of your felony. You stole the pension funds of hard-working men to finance your escape routes. You left me behind because a child would have asked too many questions about the sudden influx of cash. Take your bribe and get out of my car." David stares at the check hovering in the space between us. His jaw tightens, the muscles ticking under his skin. He realizes the transaction has failed. He snatches the paper from my hand, crumpling it into a tight fist. He reaches for the door handle, shoving it open against the howling wind. He steps back out into the freezing deluge, pausing for a fraction of a second to look back into the vehicle. "You are going to lose everything," he spits over the noise of the storm. "The lawyers will drag this out until you are bankrupt." He slams the heavy metal door, shutting out the tempest. I watch his dark figure retreat across the flooded asphalt, marching back toward his luxury SUV. The taillights flare red, illuminating the sheets of rain, before the vehicle speeds out of the parking lot, merging into the dangerous highway traffic. I am left alone in the cold driver's seat, holding the steering wheel with numb fingers. The adrenaline begins to recede, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its wake. If the person who gave you life tried to buy your silence in a parking lot, would you take the money, or would you burn their house down? The drive back from the flooded convenience store parking lot tests every ounce of my remaining focus. The coastal storm ravaging the Delmarva Peninsula intensifies, transforming Route 1 into a treacherous black ribbon slick with pooling water. The worn wiper blades of my Honda Civic scrape across the glass, struggling to clear the relentless sheets of rain. I grip the steering wheel with numb fingers, my eyes fixed on the faint red glow of the taillights ahead of me. The heater finally begins pushing lukewarm air through the vents, but the chill locked inside my bones refuses to thaw. I feel hunted. The people who share my DNA are utilizing their immense wealth to orchestrate a coordinated multi-front assault on my existence, and I am navigating the wreckage alone in a decade-old car. I reach my small apartment complex in Lewis. The building is an aging two-story structure with faded vinyl siding and a cracked asphalt lot. It lacks the manicured hedges of Greenville and the sweeping ocean views of Bethany Beach. But it belongs to me. I pay the rent on time every month using wages earned from 12-hour clinical shifts. I sprint through the freezing deluge, climbing the exterior wooden stairs to the second floor, the wind biting at my exposed neck. I unlock the deadbolt and push the door open, slipping inside and sealing the tempest out. The apartment is dark and freezing. The wind howling off the Delaware Bay rattles the loose window panes in their wooden frames, creating a constant, unsettling clatter. I do not turn on the overhead lights. I walk straight into the narrow kitchen, the soles of my wet sneakers squeaking against the faded linoleum. I drop my tote bag onto the worn Formica counter. I reach into the canvas depths and extract the physical manifestations of my ruin. I pull out the thick manila envelope containing the Chancery Court summons. The formal caveat challenging Uncle Thomas's mental competence rests inside, heavy with billable hours and corporate legal strategy. I place it on the counter. Next, I pull out the certified letter from the Delaware Board of Nursing. The crisp white paper feels like a death warrant outlining the anonymous allegations of narcotic forgery that threaten to strip my medical credentials. I set it beside the summons. Finally. I reach into the damp pocket of my scrub jacket and retrieve the crumpled pale blue cashier's check. When David fled my car in a panic, he dropped the bribe onto the passenger floorboard. I picked the wet paper off the rubber mat before driving away, keeping it as a tangible record of his desperation. $100,000, a fraction of the estate offered as a payoff to keep Case 417 permanently sealed. I dump the wrinkled check onto the growing pile of threats. I stand in the shadows staring at the three objects resting on the laminate surface. They represent the systematic dismantling of my life. The adrenaline that fueled my stoicism during the diner confrontation with Valerie, and my defiance during the parking lot clash with David suddenly evaporates. It drains out of my veins, rapidly leaving a hollow, agonizing exhaustion in its wake. I do not stand tall, facing the rattling window with a determined cinematic glare. I do not clench my jaw and vow to conquer my enemies with unwavering resolve. The sheer compounding injustice of the last few days finally shatters my endurance. The structural integrity of my composure snaps under the unbearable weight of their betrayal. My chest heaves, struggling to pull oxygen into lungs that feel banded with iron. I lean heavily against the edge of the counter, my arms trembling. My elbow slips, knocking into a tall stack of unopened utility bills and junk mail. The envelopes cascade off the surface, scattering across the floor like dead leaves, stark white squares against the dark flooring. My knees simply give out. I slide down the wooden face of the lower cabinets until my body hits the cold, hard kitchen tiles. I pull my knees tight against my chest, wrapping my arms around my shins in a desperate attempt to hold myself together. A raw, ugly sound tears its way up my throat. I reach up and pull a striped dish towel hanging from the oven door, pressing the rough cotton fabric hard against my face. I cry breathless, jagged tears into the towel. The sobs are not quiet or dignified. They are messy, loud, and full of ancient, unresolved grief. I am mourning the 15-year-old girl who waited on a concrete porch for a mother who never looked back. I am mourning the 33-year-old nurse who is about to lose the only identity she ever built. I am weeping for Uncle Thomas, the quiet factory worker whose final act of protection is being dragged through the mud by the cowards who stole from his union brethren. The physical sensation of the panic attack is overwhelming. My hands shake uncontrollably. The tears burn my eyes, blurring the scattered mail on the floor. I am a medical professional. I know the physiological markers of acute stress, but clinical knowledge offers zero comfort when the terror belongs to you. My parents possess infinite resources, and they are deploying them to crush a woman who clips grocery coupons and drives a car with a cracked mirror. The stark unfairness of the fight presses down on my shoulders, pinning me to the freezing tiles. Across the dark kitchen, a small red light begins to blink in a steady rhythmic pulse. It is the message indicator on my secure clinical answering machine, resting on the small dining table. The flashing red beacon cuts through the gloomy shadows, demanding attention. I lower the damp dish towel, my chest still shuddering with residual sobs. I push myself up off the floor, my muscles aching, and walk over to the machine. I press the playback button with a trembling finger. The audio is grainy and distorted. It is the voice of a retired dock worker, one of my regular patients at the Lewis Primary Care Facility. He suffers from severe hypertension and struggles to navigate the complexities of his Medicare coverage. He is calling the emergency after hours line to request an urgent refill for his blood pressure medication. He sounds breathless and deeply frightened, trusting me, his nurse practitioner, to ensure his prescription is authorized before the local pharmacy opens in the morning. That flashing red light and the fragile sound of his voice serve as a brutal, piercing reminder of the life I am about to lose. My nursing license is not just a piece of paper framed on a clinic wall. It is a lifeline for hundreds of working-class people in Sussex County who rely on my care. If I continue to wage this war over Uncle Thomas's sealed legacy, the medical board will suspend my credentials pending the narcotic forgery investigation. I will lose the legal authority to write that blood pressure prescription. I will lose my livelihood, my purpose, and the sanctuary I built out of helping others. I stand in the dark kitchen, surrounded by scattered mail and the looming threat of the documents resting on the counter. I question everything. I question if unearthing the 16-year-old sins of my parents is worth the total destruction of my own future. Fighting this dead uncle's war requires sacrificing the only stable thing I possess. If I surrender, if I cash David's crumpled check walk away from the $2.4 million and let Case 417 remain buried in the Chancery archives, the medical board complaint might miraculously disappear. David and Valerie would secure their victory. Their wealthy, fabricated lives would remain intact. But I would survive. I would keep my clinic job. I would keep my small apartment and my patients. I would retreat into the background exactly where they placed me decades ago. There is no perfect clarity here. There is no triumphant revelation guiding my next step. There is only the messy, terrifying reality of survival. I stand alone in a room that suddenly feels entirely too large and overwhelmingly empty, listening to the relentless wind batter the glass, wondering how much of myself I am willing to burn down just to watch them fall. The voicemail from the retired dock worker played on a loop in my head for the rest of the night. I authorized his blood pressure refill at dawn. I did not cash the pale blue check sitting on my kitchen counter. Instead, I drove to Wilmington. The cramped, windowless conference room in Miller's law office feels exactly like a subterranean war bunker. The air circulation in the aging building is terrible, leaving the space stale and thick, with the chemical smell of dry erase markers and mounting anxiety. I sit in a rigid plastic chair clutching a styrofoam cup of day-old coffee. The bitter liquid burns the back of my throat, providing a harsh, grounding focal point. We are not planning a defense anymore. We are mapping an offensive strike. Miller stands at the front of the room with his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He is a young litigator hungry for a defining victory. He understands the profound stakes of this fight because he grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Newcastle, watching wealthy developers bulldoze his community. He does not view me as just another billable hour. He views David and Valerie as the exact type of corporate predators he went to law school to dismantle. He taps a black marker against a large whiteboard, charting our tactical path forward. He explains the harsh, unforgiving arithmetic of the Delaware Court of Chancery. There are no sympathetic juries in this jurisdiction. We cannot put a weeping 15-year-old girl on the witness stand to sway the hearts of local citizens. Equity cases are decided by a single vice chancellor sitting high on a wooden bench. These judges are brilliant corporate scholars who care only about fiduciary duty, contractual breaches, and concrete documentation. Emotional appeals carry zero currency in their courtrooms. If we want to defeat the caveat challenging Uncle Thomas's mental competence, we cannot just claim my parents are cruel. We have to prove, with undeniable mathematical certainty, that they filed the injunction in bad faith. We must demonstrate to the Vice Chancellor that their legal challenge is merely a smokescreen, designed specifically to prevent the unsealing of Case 417. Miller uncaps the marker. The sharp squeak of the felt tip against the whiteboard sounds aggressive and loud in the confined room. He draws 3 separate columns. In the first column, he writes the name of the laborers' union pension fund. In the second column, he lists the anonymous Delaware LLCs we uncovered in the Georgetown archives. In the third column, he writes 2 locations, Greenville and Bethany Beach. He draws thick black arrows connecting the columns, tracing the exact flow of the stolen money. To prove bad faith, we are drafting emergency subpoenas for the historical banking ledgers of those specific LLCs. We need the unredacted transaction logs from 16 years ago. I set my styrofoam cup down on the veneer table and review the initial discovery documents scattered across the surface. My eyes scan the projected monetary values that funded my parents' luxurious new lives. The numbers are staggering. I see single transfers of $50,000 routed to a luxury auto dealership just days after the bankruptcy filing. I see a 6-figure wire transfer directed to a high-end real estate holding company in Sussex County. I stare at those printed digits, and a cold, heavy silence settles into my chest. I remember the brutal winters in Smyrna. I remember shivering at the bus stop wearing a second-hand winter coat that Uncle Thomas bought from a local thrift store because his factory overtime pay barely covered our groceries. I remember the shame of taping the soles of my shoes together during my junior year of high school. While I was rationing heating oil in a drafty row house, Valerie was writing checks drawn from a stolen union pension to finance custom draperies for her politician husband's estate. David was purchasing memberships to exclusive country clubs, using the retirement savings of men who broke their backs on construction sites. The staggering disparity between their fabricated wealth and the harsh blue-collar reality they forced upon me is no longer an abstract concept. It is printed in black ink on legal paper right in front of my face. Miller stops writing and turns to look at me. The harsh fluorescent lights cast deep shadows under his eyes. He needs me to understand the precarious edge we are walking on. This legal strategy is incredibly risky. By subpoenaing the financial ledgers and directly tying the caveat to the union embezzlement, we are going all in on a single hand. We are forcing the Vice Chancellor to look behind the curtain of the LLC shield. But if the judge denies our motion to unseal the banking records, we lose our leverage entirely. The consequences of failure extend far beyond the loss of the $2.4 million inheritance. Miller lays out the collateral damage with brutal honesty. If we fail to establish the link between the estate injunction and the stolen funds, David and Valerie will win the civil case. And if they secure that victory, the Delaware Board of Nursing will view the loss as an indictment of my character. The anonymous complaint regarding the forged narcotics prescriptions will gain immediate traction. The medical board will use the civil defeat as administrative grounds to revoke my nurse practitioner license permanently. The arithmetic of justice offers no guarantees. The law is not a moral compass. It is a mechanism, and my parents possess decades of experience manipulating its gears to their advantage. I pick up my coffee cup and take another sip of the bitter cold liquid. The stakes are terrifying, but the alternative is surrender. Submitting to their intimidation tactics would mean accepting a lifetime of looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next anonymous attack. It would mean letting them erase Uncle Thomas's final act of defiance. I look at the whiteboard. The black arrows connecting the union pension to the elite estates form a clear, undeniable map of their cowardice. Draft the subpoenas, I tell Miller, my voice steady in the stale air. Request every single banking ledger, every wire transfer, and every registered agent signature linked to those shell companies. We are going to drag their financial skeletons out of the closet and dump them right onto the Vice Chancellor's desk. Miller nods, a sharp, grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. He begins organizing the paperwork, stacking the subpoena templates into a neat, precise pile. We spend the next 6 hours drafting the legal motions, cross-referencing dates, and building an ironclad argument for the judge. The bunker mentality of the room fuels our momentum. We are a two-person army preparing to breach the walls of a fortress guarded by expensive corporate litigators. By the time we finish, the sun has long since set. I walk out of the Wilmington Law Office and into the cool evening air. The coastal storm has passed, leaving the city streets damp and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I unlock my Honda Civic and slide into the driver's seat, feeling the profound exhaustion radiating deep in my muscles. I turn the ignition key and the engine rumbles to life. I pull out onto the highway heading south toward Lewis. The strategy is locked in place. The legal mechanisms have been initiated. But I know my parents will not simply wait for the court date. The moment those subpoenas land on their lawyers' desks, the conflict will escalate beyond the confines of the legal system. They will realize that hiding behind their attorneys is no longer sufficient. They will summon reinforcements to protect their social standing, bringing their wealthy, powerful new spouses into the fray. The quiet, tactical war is about to become a loud, vicious public spectacle. The drive north on Route 1 toward Wilmington feels like crossing an invisible border into a foreign country. Sussex County is defined by flat farmland, coastal marshes, and small, tight-knit communities that rely on seasonal tourism and commercial crabbing. Wilmington is the corporate heart of the state, a powerful financial hub where over 60% of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated. The legal machinery in this city is explicitly designed to protect capital, to shield assets, and to resolve high-stakes disputes behind closed doors. The courthouse reflects this reality. It is an imposing, heavy structure of stone and glass, a monument to the generational wealth that dictates the rules of the region. Walking through the metal detectors and surrendering my belongings to the security guards, I feel the immense weight of the institution pressing down on my shoulders. I am wearing my only tailored suit. A sensible gray blend purchased off a discount rack 5 years ago for a nursing conference. I have never felt more out of place. Miller and I take the elevator to the upper floors, navigating toward the Vice Chancellor's chambers. The wood-paneled waiting room outside the courtroom feels suffocatingly traditional. Dark, polished mahogany covers every vertical surface, absorbing the meager, natural light filtering through the narrow windows. Oil portraits of severe-looking historical judges stare down from the walls, their expressions frozen in permanent judgment. The air is dry, smelling faintly of expensive floor wax and ancient leather-bound volumes. We sit on a hard wooden bench reviewing our subpoena motions one final time. We are waiting for the deposition scheduling hearing to begin, the crucial procedural step where the judge will determine the timeline for the discovery process. Down the long corridor, a set of heavy double doors swings open. David arrives, but he does not lead the procession. He is flanked by 2 senior partners from his high-priced litigation firm, men carrying thick leather briefcases and projecting an aura of expensive confidence. Trailing just a half step behind them is his wife, Victoria. She belongs to a prominent real estate dynasty down in Bethany Beach, a family that practically owns miles of prime commercial coastline. She glides into the waiting area, bringing an undeniable gravitational pull that forces the lawyers to adjust their spacing to accommodate her presence. She wears a pristine camel-colored cashmere coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, the sleeves hanging empty. It is a style choice that signals she has people to carry her burdens for her. She does not glance in my direction. She looks right through me. She is attending this routine administrative hearing to assert her territory, marking the perimeter around her husband and her family name. The bailiff calls us into the chamber. It is not a grand courtroom equipped with a vast jury box. It is an intimate, high-ceilinged room specifically designed for complex equity disputes. David takes his seat at the respondent table, looking uncharacteristically small and pale under the recessed lighting. Victoria claims the center seat in the front row of the gallery, positioned directly behind him. She crosses her legs, resting a structured designer handbag on her lap. Her posture projects total entitlement. She is establishing a physical barrier, reminding everyone in the room that my father is shielded by her immense resources. The scheduling hearing is dry, procedural, and agonizingly tense. The Vice Chancellor reviews the motions, his face impassive. As Miller stands to argue the necessity of subpoenaing the historical LLC banking ledgers, pushing for an aggressive discovery timeline, Victoria leans forward slightly. She whispers a brief instruction to one of the senior partners seated at the table. The lawyer nods deferentially to her, completely bypassing David. The power dynamic snaps into sharp focus. It becomes instantly clear who is actually funding this legal defense. David is merely the liability she is paying to manage. 30 minutes into the proceedings, the Vice Chancellor raises a hand, calling for a brief recess to review a specific legal precedent cited by the opposing counsel. The sudden pause leaves a tense, unresolved energy hanging thick in the chamber. I need to breathe. I stand up, excusing myself from Miller, and walk out into the quiet corridor. I locate the public restroom down the hall and push through the heavy swinging door. The environment shifts dramatically from the warm, oppressive wood tones of the courtroom. The harsh fluorescent lights reflect sharply off the sterile white subway tiles lining the walls. It feels clinical, cold, and entirely unforgiving. I walk over to the row of porcelain sinks. I place my hands under the automatic sensor of the middle basin. The cold rush of water triggers immediately, loud and forceful, drowning out the low mechanical hum of the ceiling ventilation fan. I splash the freezing water onto my wrists, trying to manually lower my racing heart rate. The heavy restroom door groans open. I look up into the wide mirror spanning the wall above the sinks. Victoria walks into the room. She does not check her hair or walk toward an empty stall. She steps directly into my personal space, standing just inches away from my right shoulder. The contrast reflected in the mirror is striking. My inexpensive gray suit looks flimsy and worn next to the rich, heavy drape of her cashmere coat. She radiates wealth. She radiates a casual, terrifying authority. "You are just a nurse trying to cash in on a mistake from 2 decades ago," she states. Her tone is entirely flat, devoid of any heated anger. She delivers the insult as if stating a mundane meteorological fact. She raises her left hand, casually adjusting a thick diamond tennis bracelet that catches the harsh fluorescent glare, fracturing the light into sharp prisms. "My husband made a poor business calculation when he was young. It happens in the corporate world. But dragging my family name into a public spectacle for a quick payout is incredibly tacky." Her words reveal the true chilling horror of her social class. She knows about the stolen union pension funds. She knows David embezzled the retirement savings of hard-working laborers to finance his escape. And she classifies that devastating felony merely as a poor business calculation. To her, white-collar theft is just a ledger error, a minor indiscretion easily erased by hiring the right defense attorneys. The cold water continues to rush over my hands, numbing my skin. I do not turn to face her with a fearless glare. I do not deliver a sharp, triumphant comeback designed to shatter her towering ego. The reality of the moment is far less cinematic. I am terrified. My hands are shaking. Raw adrenaline floods my nervous system, making my throat tight and my knees alarmingly weak. The fear is genuine because her power to destroy my life is genuine. I pull my hands away from the sensor. The water stops abruptly, leaving only the drone of the ventilation fan to fill the void. I reach over and pull a coarse brown paper towel from the metal dispenser. I dry my hands slowly, focusing on the rough friction of the paper against my damp skin, buying myself a crucial fraction of a second to steady my erratic breathing. I drop the crumpled towel into the stainless steel trash bin and turn to face her. My voice shakes slightly when I finally speak, betrayed by the chemical surge of adrenaline refusing to hide my vulnerability. "I am protecting what is left of the man who actually raised me while your husband ran away." The stark honesty of the statement hangs suspended in the sterile air. Victoria does not offer a defensive rebuttal. She simply scoffs a short, distinct sound of pure disdain, dismissing my grief as a trivial, lower-class inconvenience. She turns on her heel. The sharp click of her designer shoes echoes loud and fierce against the ceramic floor tiles as she marches toward the exit. The heavy door swings shut behind her. She leaves, the dense, cloying scent of expensive floral perfume lingering in the damp, cold air. It smells like crushed lilies and wealth, suffocating and deeply invasive. I stand alone in the silence, fighting the sudden urge to be sick. My hands are still trembling against the edge of the sink. I reach into my suit jacket pocket and pull out my phone, needing to check the time before returning to the hostile courtroom. The screen lights up, displaying a new urgent text message. The sender is my clinical supervisor from the primary care facility in Lewis. The message reads, "Harper, call me the minute you get a break." I just pulled the internal electronic medical records logs regarding those forged prescriptions. You need to see this IP address right now. The ground beneath my feet tilts sharply. The medical board threat, the anonymous complaint designed to strip my nursing license and dismantle my livelihood, is escalating rapidly, threatening to destroy my career before I can even secure a procedural victory in this courthouse. The vice-chancellor struck his wooden gavel against the sounding block, signaling the end of the scheduling hearing and granting our motion for expedited discovery. The procedural victory felt distant and hollow compared to the urgent text message burning a hole in my pocket. I did not linger in the oppressive mahogany corridor to watch David and Victoria confer with their expensive legal team. I bypassed Miller with a brief nod, pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Wilmington courthouse, and sprinted toward the parking garage. The drive south on Route 1 usually takes 90 minutes. I completed the journey to Sussex County in just over an hour, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. The coastal highway blurred into a gray streak of passing farmland and strip malls. The only thing occupying my mind was the anonymous Delaware Board of Nursing complaint threatening to strip my medical credentials. I pulled my 10-year-old Honda Civic into the empty lot of the Lewis Primary Care Facility. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the asphalt. The front sliding doors were locked for the evening. I used my keycard to enter through the staff entrance, the heavy metal door clicking shut behind me, sealing me inside the quiet building. The clinic smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and industrial floor wax, a comforting, familiar scent that usually grounded me. Tonight it felt like a crime scene. I walked straight down the narrow hallway toward the administrative wing. A single rectangle of pale light spilled out from the slightly ajar door of the back office. My clinical supervisor, Sarah, sat behind a cluttered metal desk. Sarah is a veteran healthcare administrator who spent 2 decades running a chaotic emergency room in Dover before transitioning to primary care. She possesses a pragmatic, unflinching demeanor forged by years of managing trauma and bureaucratic red tape. She does not panic. She triages. When the state board notified the clinic of the anonymous narcotic diversion allegations, she did not immediately suspend my clinical privileges. She knew my character, and she understood the rigorous, unyielding ethical boundaries I maintained with my patients. Instead of treating me as a liability, she initiated a deep, independent internal audit of our electronic medical record system. The sterile glow of the computer monitor illuminated her face, highlighting the deep shadows of exhaustion resting under her eyes. She had stayed hours past her shift, digging through lines of encrypted digital code. She did not look up when I stepped into the room. She simply gestured toward the empty plastic chair positioned beside her desk. I sat down, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The EMR software loaded sluggishly, the blue progress bar inching across the screen. Each passing second stretched the tension in the small room, pulling the air tight. To forge a prescription for Schedule II narcotics, an individual must navigate a complex multi-factor authentication process. Uncle Thomas possessed a patient portal account, a standard feature we use to monitor his palliative care symptoms and communicate with his oncology team. The anonymous complaint alleged that I used my administrative override to bypass his portal, requesting liquid morphine and fentanyl under his name, and then approving the requests using my own practitioner credentials. Sarah clicked a drop-down menu accessing the raw, unfiltered security logs for my uncle's specific patient profile. The screen populated with hundreds of chronological timestamps documenting every login, every page view, and every data entry associated with his medical history. We scanned the dates, searching for the final 2 months of his life, the period highlighted in the state board investigation. Sarah found the cluster of narcotic requests. They were submitted late at night, long after the clinic had closed, requested directly through the patient-facing side of the portal. She highlighted the specific entries, her mouse gliding over the digital ledger. Our medical software records the originating Internet Protocol address for every single action taken within the system. It is a mandatory federal compliance feature designed specifically to prevent fraudulent access. The IP address attached to the falsified medication requests did not originate from the clinic network. It did not originate from my apartment router, and it did not originate from Uncle Thomas's row house in Smyrna. Sarah copied the string of numbers. The sharp click of her mouse resonated in the quiet office, sounding as loud and definitive as a gunshot. She opened a secondary browser window and pasted the numeric sequence into a standard publicly available geolocation tracking tool. The search engine processed the query, translating the digital footprint into a physical geographic location. A map materialized on the screen, a red pin dropping with pinpoint accuracy onto a specific coordinate. The address traced directly back to a residential broadband router registered in Greenville, Delaware. Greenville is an exclusive, highly affluent enclave located in the northernmost tip of the state. It is a neighborhood defined by sprawling estates, private security patrols, and generational wealth. It is the exact neighborhood where my mother Valerie resides with her politician husband. The cold, unforgiving calculation of my mother's sabotage lay bare in stark black and white data on the glowing monitor. She had not simply tipped off the medical board with a vague rumor. She had actively orchestrated a digital forgery. During the chaotic weeks following Uncle Thomas's death, she must have gained access to his mail, locating his patient portal login credentials among his personal effects. She sat in her pristine, multi-million-dollar estate, logged into his medical profile, and requested lethal doses of narcotics. She created a fabricated digital paper trail, knowing the automated system would flag the irregular requests, knowing the state board would trace the prescriptions back to the attending nurse practitioner. She engineered a scenario guaranteed to trigger a catastrophic investigation into my license. An immense physical relief washed over my entire body, starting at the crown of my head and rushing down to the soles of my feet. The tight, painful knot that had lived at the base of my spine for the past week finally uncoiled. I slumped heavily into the cheap plastic waiting room chair, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, fighting back the sudden, overwhelming sting of tears. They were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated vindication. For days, I had carried the suffocating terror of losing my livelihood. I had envisioned the medical board stripping my credentials, leaving me bankrupt and entirely defenseless against the estate litigation. I had believed my parents held all the cards, operating with an untouchable, invisible precision. But wealth and arrogance often breed a dangerous, profound sloppiness. Valerie believed she was invincible. She assumed the digital realm provided a perfect, untraceable shield for her vindictive actions. She never considered that a stubborn veteran clinical supervisor in a rural primary care facility would possess the technical acumen to pull the raw security logs. She never considered that her own residential router would betray her location. Sarah hit the print command. The heavy laser printer in the corner of the office whirred to life, spitting out 3 crisp, warm pages of documentation. She collated the sheets, stapled the corner, and handed the stack of paper to me. The documents felt heavy, carrying the weight of my salvation. They left a digital paper trail. In her desperate attempt to neutralize my claim to the $2.4 million trust, Valerie committed federal wire fraud and identity theft. She weaponized the medical system to destroy her own daughter, and in doing so, she handed me the exact tool required to dismantle her life. The medical board threat instantly transformed from a lethal weapon aimed at my chest into concrete, undeniable evidence of their bad faith. The state investigators would no longer look at me as a suspect. They would look at the Greenville IP address. When presented with this printed log, the vice chancellor presiding over the estate dispute would see the caveat for exactly what it was: a malicious, coordinated fraud designed to silence a witness. I folded the printed logs, carefully slipping them into the interior pocket of my suit jacket. The paper rested against my ribs, a shield forged from their own arrogance. The fear that had dictated my every movement since the reading of the will evaporated, replaced by a cold, rigid, tactical clarity. My parents wanted to play a high-stakes game of legal intimidation. They wanted to drag me into sworn testimonies and aggressive interrogations. They wanted to sit across a polished veneer table and watch me break under the pressure of their expensive corporate litigators. I thanked Sarah, my voice steady and resolute, in the quiet office. I walked out of the clinic and into the cool, coastal night. I was no longer dreading the upcoming legal proceedings. I was holding the exact coordinates of their ruin, and I was ready to bring the entire fabricated structure crashing down on their heads. The air conditioning inside the glass-walled Wilmington conference room operates at a punishing, unyielding temperature. The forced chill blows directly down from the overhead industrial vents, freezing the perspiration forming on the back of my neck. I sit rigid in a high-backed leather chair, my spine pressed hard against the upholstery. We are 40 floors above the city streets. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the corporate skyline of Delaware stretches out under a pale, overcast sky. The sprawling banks and hedge fund headquarters look like stone monuments to the capital flowing through this jurisdiction. Inside this sealed glass box, the environment is designed to strip away comfort and induce fatigue. David sits across the wide expanse of the polished mahogany veneer table. He looks rested, projecting the manufactured confidence of a man shielded by endless resources. He wears a tailored charcoal suit that drapes perfectly over his shoulders, paired with a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. Sitting directly to his right is Preston, a senior corporate litigator who bills by the minute and earns his exorbitant fee by dismantling opposing witnesses. Preston is a man in his late 50s with thinning silver hair and a posture built on decades of courtroom dominance. He does not view me as a grieving niece or a dedicated medical professional. He views me as a structural obstacle blocking a multi-million-dollar transfer of wealth. The deposition is a grueling endurance test. For 3 straight hours, Preston controls the rhythm of the interrogation, weaving a narrative designed to characterize me as an opportunistic, absent relative. He holds a printed copy of my clinic time cards, highlighting the long 60-hour weeks I worked during Uncle Thomas's final months. "You claim you were the primary caregiver for the deceased," Preston says, his voice smooth and carrying the dangerous edge of a scalpel. "Yet these employment records indicate you routinely worked consecutive 12-hour overnight rotations at the Lewis facility. Who was administering his medication during those lengthy absences, Ms. Rodriguez? Did you simply leave an elderly, terminally ill man to fend for himself while you pursued your own career advancement?" The mechanical tapping of the stenographer's keys records every single syllable. The sound is sharp, rhythmic, and relentless, echoing off the glass walls like a metronome tracking my anxiety. I try to explain the intricate schedule I coordinated with the visiting hospice nurses. I try to detail the early morning hours I spent preparing his meals before my shifts, and the late evenings spent sitting by his bedside reading to him while he drifted in and out of consciousness. But Preston does not allow me to finish a sentence. He interrupts, twisting my words, weaponizing my dedication to my patients into evidence of neglect toward my uncle. He paints a picture of a greedy, distant niece who only showed up at the very end to secure a lucrative spot in the will. My palms sweat, sticking uncomfortably to the polished wood of the table. I shift my weight, trying to peel my skin away from the veneer without drawing attention to my physical discomfort. My throat goes dry. I reach for the glass pitcher in the center of the table, but my hand trembles, sending a faint ripple through the icy water. I pull my hand back, refusing to give Preston the satisfaction of watching me shake. I stumble over the dates of Thomas's chemotherapy appointments. I hesitate, second-guessing my own memory under the barrage of rapid-fire accusations. Every defensive pause, every stutter is immortalized by the clicking keys of the court reporter. I feel the distinct suffocating sensation of being backed into a corner. The oxygen in the room feels thin, filtered, and inadequate. I need a focal point to stop the room from spinning. I refuse to look at Preston's smug expression, and I refuse to look at the towering stacks of bankers' boxes filled with their fabricated evidence. My eyes lock onto a small physical object, resting precisely in the center of David's chest. It is a silver tie clip cast in the shape of a nautical anchor. The anchor clip is a gift from his wealthy new life. It is the type of accessory worn by men who spend their weekends lounging on private yachts, moored in the Bethany Beach marina. It represents the maritime leisure class he married into a world funded by the coastal real estate empire of his current wife. He wears the silver anchor like a badge of honor, projecting stability and elite status. The visual irony of the object grounds my rising panic. David is wearing an anchor, yet he is the man who cut the line and let his own teenage daughter drift out into the freezing marshlands. He is a man who stole the retirement pensions of blue-collar union workers to buy his way onto those yachts. He has no real weight, no actual substance. He is entirely hollow, a parasite clinging to the hull of someone else's ship. Staring at the small gleaming piece of silver, the fear begins to drain out of my system. The cold air blasting from the vents no longer feels paralyzing. It feels bracing. I stop stuttering. I square my shoulders, pressing the soles of my shoes flat against the carpet. I let the anger replace the intimidation. Preston notices the shift in my posture. He interprets it as defiance, and he decides it is time to deliver his fatal blow. He opens a manila folder and extracts a sheet of paper featuring the official letterhead of the Delaware Board of Nursing. He places it flat on the mahogany table, sliding it forward with a single deliberate push of his index finger. "Let us discuss your professional integrity," Preston states, leaning back in his leather chair. "We have received information indicating that the State Medical Board is currently investigating you for narcotic diversion. Specifically allegations that you forged prescriptions for liquid morphine and high-dosage fentanyl patches using your uncle's patient portal. If you were willing to commit federal wire fraud to secure lethal narcotics, it stands to reason you would exert undue influence over a dying man's financial estate." David watches my face, waiting for the devastating collapse. He expects me to crumble, to plead the fifth, or to burst into frantic tears. He expects the threat of losing my nursing license to force a rapid, unconditional surrender. I do not say a word. I turn my head slightly and look at Miller. My junior lawyer has remained quiet for the past 3 hours, allowing opposing counsel to lay out their entire narrative trap. Miller opens his scuffed brown leather briefcase. He reaches inside and retrieves the crisp, warm pages printed from the clinic's back office just 2 nights ago. He does not announce his actions with a booming, dramatic objection. He simply slides the printed electronic medical records logs across the wide expanse of the table, stopping them just inches away from Preston's manicured hands. The IP address associated with those falsified medication requests is highlighted in bright yellow marker. Stapled directly behind the digital log is the geolocation tracking report featuring the red pin dropped squarely onto the Greenville residential coordinates. Preston glances down at the paperwork. He reads the highlighted numbers. He flips to the second page and reads the geographic location. A seasoned litigator knows exactly when a carefully constructed narrative steps on a hidden landmine. Preston stops speaking. He closes his mouth, his lips pressing into a thin, grim line. He does not ask another question. The silence in the glass-walled conference room stretches out thick and suffocating. The stenographer, realizing nobody is talking, stops typing. The sudden absence of the clicking keys creates a vacuum in the air, leaving only the low, steady hum of the overhead ventilation system. David realizes something has gone wrong. He leans over his lawyer's shoulder, squinting at the highlighted text. It takes a few seconds for his brain to process the arithmetic of the IP log, to connect the digital numbers to the physical reality of his ex-wife's sprawling estate in northern Delaware. When the realization hits, the polished, confident facade shatters. The color drains out of his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw drops slightly. He stares at the undeniable proof of Valerie's digital forgery, comprehending the catastrophic error she made. In her vindictive attempt to destroy my medical career, she acted independently, operating outside the protection of their expensive legal counsel. She logged into a monitored federal medical database from her own living room and committed a felony, leaving a permanent, traceable signature. David looks up from the paper, his eyes wide and panicked, locking onto my face across the veneer divide. The unity of their defense is destroyed. He knows that presenting a forged narcotic request to a state medical board constitutes severe criminal fraud. He also knows that when the vice chancellor views this document, the bad faith nature of their caveat will be exposed to the searing light of the courtroom. The imposing corporate architecture they built to intimidate me begins to splinter and crack under the crushing weight of documented arithmetic. The deposition is over, and the real war has just breached their gates. A junior paralegal rushed past me 10 minutes earlier carrying a tray of refreshments. She bumped the edge of a mahogany side table resting against the hallway wall. A tall glass of ice water tipped over, spilling its contents. The paralegal murmured a quick apology and hurried into another room, leaving the mess behind. I sit in a high-backed leather chair and watch the water pool on the polished wooden surface of the table. The liquid creeps toward the beveled edge. A single drop forms. Swells and falls. It lands on the thick, expensive wool carpet below. Then another drop falls. The dark stain spreads outward, soaking into the pristine fibers, ruining the flawless aesthetic of the corridor. The slow, steady creep of the water mirrors the irreversible unraveling of my parents' 16-year lie. They spent over a decade and a half maintaining a pristine facade, and now a single careless spill is destroying the entire foundation. The heavy oak doors of the private mediation room stand 10 feet away. The court ordered a mandatory recess after Miller presented the digital IP logs, demanding that opposing counsel confer with their clients in private. The thick wood and soundproofing panels are designed to contain privileged corporate negotiations. They fail to muffle the frantic, escalating panic of two people staring at federal prison time. Their voices bleed through the heavy timber, sharp and clear. David strikes first. His tone is devoid of the polished charm he uses at coastal charity galas. It is frantic and desperate. "You were sloppy with the medical board complaint," he hisses, his words vibrating through the hallway. "You bypassed the lawyers and logged into a federal medical database from your own living room. You handed her the exact leverage she needed to break the caveat." Valerie does not retreat. The Greenville socialite built her entire persona on maintaining control, but cornered animals do not care about poise. She fires back, her voice raw and shrill, piercing the thick oak barrier. "I had to neutralize her." "David," she snaps back, "you hoarded the pension payouts to fund that Greenville estate. I had to claw my way into my husband's good graces using the scraps you left behind while you bought your way into Bethany Beach. If she unseals case 417, my husband loses his political career and I lose everything. I took action while you sat around hoping your expensive attorneys would magically fix your mess." Their argument exposes the hollow core of their alliance. Growing up, I believed my parents shared a mutual, unbreakable bond. Even when they filed for bankruptcy and divorced, they moved in tandem, executing their abandonment of me with synchronized precision. I assumed they possessed a deep intrinsic loyalty to one another, forged in the fires of their shared crimes. Sitting in the cold courthouse corridor, the realization hits me with quiet, profound clarity. Their bond was never built on familial loyalty or mutual respect. Their partnership was a fragile Cold War truce constructed entirely on mutual self-preservation. They were two thieves holding loaded weapons to each other's heads, terrified that if one flinched, they both would perish. The threat of the subpoenaed LLC documents and the exposed IP address acts as the ultimate catalyst. When the looming shadow of federal prison resurfaces, the base instinct to survive overrides their fabricated partnership. David cares only about protecting the coastal real estate empire he married into. Valerie cares only about maintaining the elite social standing she purchased with stolen union funds. They are no longer a united front intent on starving me out of my inheritance. They are two desperate suspects turning on each other, searching for a way to secure personal immunity at the expense of their former accomplice. The water continues to drip off the side table. Plop, plop. The dark stain on the wool carpet grows wider. I listen to the vicious accusations flying back and forth behind the oak doors. David threatens to testify that the digital forgery was a unilateral action taken without his knowledge, hoping to shield himself from the federal wire fraud charges. Valerie retaliates by threatening to surrender the original ledgers of the logistics company, proving David orchestrated the initial pension embezzlement before she ever touched the money. They are tearing their own structure down from the inside. Miller sits in the chair next to me, reviewing his notes. He hears the muffled shouting, but he does not smile or gloat. He remains vigilant, understanding that desperate people possess the capacity to execute unpredictable, dangerous maneuvers. He packs the printed electronic medical records logs back into his scuffed briefcase, locking the brass clasps. The evidence has already done its job. It fractured the enemy camp without us ever having to say a word. The heavy oak doors suddenly burst open. Preston steps out into the corridor. The senior corporate litigator no longer projects an aura of expensive confidence. His face is flushed, and he carries his leather briefcase tightly against his side. He does not look back at the room he just exited. He walks directly over to Miller and me. He does not offer a greeting. He looks exhausted, his silver hair slightly disheveled. My clients are no longer able to reach a consensus regarding their legal strategy. Preston states, his voice tight and formal. Due to an irreconcilable conflict of interest regarding the newly presented evidence, my firm is formally withdrawing as their legal counsel effective immediately. I will be notifying the Vice Chancellor of our withdrawal. Preston turns and walks briskly down the hallway, eager to distance himself and his prestigious law firm from the radioactive fallout of federal felonies. He abandons his clients, leaving them stranded in the mediation room without a shred of legal protection. The expensive shield they purchased with the stolen money has just evaporated into thin air. A few seconds later, Victoria emerges from the mediation room. David's wealthy wife grips the strap of her designer handbag so hard her knuckles are pure white. She glares at the open doorway, her expression radiating pure aristocratic disgust. She spent her entire life insulating her family name from scandal, and she just listened to her husband confess to a decade and a half of unmitigated fraud. She walks past me without a single word, her heels clicking a rapid, frantic retreat toward the elevators. She is abandoning him too, retreating to her gated waterfront property to call her own team of divorce attorneys. David and Valerie are left alone in the windowless room. The shouting has stopped, replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. I stand up from the leather chair, smoothing the wrinkles out of my inexpensive gray suit. The dark water stain on the expensive carpet is now a permanent blemish. I look at Miller. He nods, picking up his briefcase. We do not need to wait for a negotiated settlement. We do not need to entertain any more desperate bribes or listen to fabricated apologies. The self-destruction of their alliance has cleared the path forward. A court clerk appears at the end of the corridor holding a clipboard. The Vice Chancellor is ready to resume the proceedings, she announces, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway. He is calling all parties back into the chamber for an immediate ruling on the discovery motions. I walk toward the courtroom doors, knowing my parents have to follow. They must walk back into that room, stripped of their expensive lawyers, abandoned by their wealthy spouses, and entirely unprotected from the truth. The legal architecture they used to torment me has collapsed. Now they have to face the judge and answer for the secrets buried inside the archives. The final unsealing is no longer a distant threat looming on the horizon. It is happening right now. And they have run out of places to hide. We walk back into the Chancery courtroom, and the environment feels fundamentally altered. The high windows cut sharp shafts of pale sunlight through the dim interior, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing lazily in the stagnant air. The sprawling respondent table, previously crowded with expensive leather briefcases and confident litigators, now looks vast and barren. David and Valerie sit alone. They look like shipwreck survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood. The vice-chancellor takes his seat at the elevated bench. He surveys the diminished defense. He acknowledges the formal withdrawal of their counsel and asks if they intend to proceed without representation. David opens his mouth, but no sound emerges. His vocal cords fail him. Valerie remains frozen, her eyes locked on the grain of the wooden table. Their silence is comprehensive. Miller steps forward to the podium. He does not boast. He presents the printed medical board logs, the traced IP address, and the formal motion to unseal the docket due to egregious bad faith. The vice-chancellor accepts the paperwork. He reads the documentation detailing the forged narcotic prescriptions. The atmosphere in the room shifts from procedural boredom to sharp, alert judicial scrutiny. The judge picks up a heavy steel letter opener. He breaks the red wax seal on the thick manila envelope that sat locked in the court vault for over a decade and a half. The sound of tearing paper echoes loud in the silent chamber. He extracts a dense leather-bound evidence binder. This is the heart of Case 417. It contains the original unredacted financial ledgers of our bankrupt family logistics company, hundreds of bank transfer receipts, and a sworn, notarized affidavit signed by Uncle Thomas. The vice-chancellor begins to read the affidavit silently. His brow furrows. He turns page after page, his eyes scanning the precise arithmetic of a stolen union pension. The room waits. The ticking of the brass wall clock marks the death of my parents' fabricated reality. When the judge finally speaks, his voice carries a cold, devastating authority. He reads Thomas's words into the official public record, unraveling a mystery that haunted me for 16 years. Thomas was a man who spent his life on the factory floor, a proud card-carrying union member who believed in the sanctity of a hard day of labor. When he reviewed the shipping manifests and financial statements his brother carelessly left unsecured 16 years ago, he spotted the discrepancies immediately. He tracked the missing pension funds routing into the anonymous Delaware shell companies. He did not call the federal authorities. He did not hire a lawyer. He drove to our house and confronted his brother. Thomas knew that if the federal agents raided the property, my parents would face immediate arrest. Their assets would be seized. I was a 15-year-old girl. I would have witnessed my mother and father led away in handcuffs, and I would have become a ward of the state trapped in the foster care system as the penniless daughter of convicted felons. Thomas refused to let my life be destroyed by their greed. The affidavit reveals the undeniable truth of my abandonment. My parents did not discard me because I was a financial burden. They did not leave me behind to secure a clean break. Thomas forced them to surrender me. He held a loaded gun to their heads in the form of a detailed financial audit. He demanded full physical custody of his niece in exchange for his temporary silence. He brokered a brutal, unbreakable deal. He took the incriminating ledgers and sealed them inside a generation-skipping trust. The legal mechanism contained one specific defining stipulation. He gave them the remainder of his natural life to quietly, anonymously repay the stolen funds back into the union pension accounts. If the ledger balanced by the day he died, the trust would dissolve the evidence bearing the crime forever. He granted them a decade and a half to discover a conscience. He offered them a path to redemption. The vice-chancellor reads the final accounting attached to the back of the affidavit. 0 deposits were ever made to the union fund. David and Valerie spent 16 years assuming Thomas was an uneducated blue-collar worker incapable of executing a sophisticated legal trap. They assumed his inevitable death would bury their secret in the ground alongside him. They utilize the stolen cash to purchase political influence, coastal mansions, and expensive luxury vehicles, never sparing a single dime to repay the men who broke their backs to earn that retirement money. They gambled their freedom on the belief that they were smarter than a factory worker. They were tragically incorrect. Thomas built a masterpiece of equity law, trapping their fate inside an airtight vault. The judge lowers the binder. He looks down at David and Valerie with profound, undisguised judicial disgust. He addresses the caveat they filed against the will. He states that challenging the mental competence of a man who orchestrated such a brilliant protective legal structure is not merely baseless. Combined with the forged narcotic prescriptions aimed at destroying a medical professional, the injunction constitutes a malicious fraud upon the court. The vice-chancellor raises his wooden gavel. He declares that the caveat is dismissed with prejudice. The heavy thud of the mallet striking the sounding block cracks through the air like a rifle shot. The civil dispute ends in that exact fraction of a second. The $2.4 million trust is unlocked, transferring clear and free into my name. The modest row house in Smyrna is secure. David slumps forward in his chair. The tailored charcoal suit suddenly appears 3 sizes too big, the expensive fabric swallowing his rapidly collapsing frame. The weight of a 16-year delayed consequence drops directly onto his spine, crushing his posture. He stares at his trembling hands, watching his phantom wealth evaporate into a looming federal indictment. His coastal estate, his boats, his elite country club status, all of it is gone. Valerie remains rigid, staring blankly at the polished plaintiff table. Her eyes are wide, unblinking, tracking a microscopic flaw in the wood grain. The Greenville socialite is dead, replaced by a cornered suspect waiting for the inevitable arrival of law enforcement. They built a fortress out of lies, and a dead man just leveled it with a stack of paper. The legal architecture Uncle Thomas constructed held perfectly, shielding me while exposing their rot to the light of day. I sit beside Miller, feeling the staggering magnitude of my uncle's sacrifice wash over me. He lived his entire life in a drafty house, clipping coupons and working overtime, never touching a single cent of the trust money, all to ensure I had a future free from the stain of their crimes. I want to stand up and walk out of the courtroom to drive back to the ocean and breathe free air. But the vice-chancellor does not dismiss the room. He signals to his head clerk. He announces that the evidence of medical forgery and union embezzlement cannot remain confined to a civil chancery docket. He is formally referring the unsealed file to the Delaware Attorney General and the Federal Department of Labor. He instructs the court bailiff to contact the state authorities, immediately initiating a lockdown of the chamber until the Financial Crimes Unit arrives to take custody of the defendants. The Civil War is over, but a far more dangerous criminal nightmare has just breached the walls. My parents turn to look at me, their eyes filled with a new feral terror. They realize they are not going home tonight, and the doors of the courtroom have just transformed into the bars of a cage. The coastal winter wind blowing off the Atlantic Ocean creates a jagged, freezing edge that cuts through my heavy coat and whips my hair violently across my face. I stand on the dunes at Cape Henlopen State Park, listening to the surf crashing against the sand. The sound is loud, unrelenting, and deeply cleansing. It washes away the lingering staleness of the courthouse air and the sharp chemical sting of the clinic. The $2.4 million trust transferred seamlessly into my name the day after the vice-chancellor finalized the ruling. I walked into the local credit union and paid off the high-interest personal loan that had kept me awake for weeks. I am finally debt-free. The financial noose my parents tried to tighten around my neck has been cut. I am not wealthy by the standards of the Greenville estates or the Bethany Beach developers, but I am secure. The state attorney general accepted the referral from the Chancery Court within 48 hours of the ruling. Federal agents arrived at the waterfront properties and the gated Greenville mansions, armed with search warrants and precise forensic accounting audits. The rapid collapse of the Paxton social facade was absolute. The wealthy spouses who spent years admiring Valerie's charity galas and David's business acumen scrambled to initiate emergency divorce proceedings the moment the embezzlement charges hit the evening news. They acted with the same cold calculation my parents once used to manage their own interests. They sought to ring-fence their personal assets and salvage what remained of their social reputations by discarding the people who had brought such radioactive scandal into their lives. David and Valerie are currently navigating a brutal multi-front legal war without a single ally or a scrap of protection. I did not quit my job at the Lewis Primary Care Facility. I continue to treat the local crabbers who haul heavy metal traps through the freezing bay and the kitchen staff who suffer through the punishing heat of the summer boardwalk rush. The inheritance did not change my daily routine. It did not transform me into a different person. It simply removed the grinding bone-deep terror of mere survival. I no longer check my bank account balance before buying groceries, and I no longer worry about the cost of a car repair. That freedom is the only luxury I care to claim. I walk down toward the shoreline where the tide is retreating. I reach down and scoop up a handful of wet sand, letting it sift through my fingers until I find a rough piece of green sea glass. I roll the fragment between my thumb and forefinger, feeling the worn, smooth edges created by decades of relentless wave action. It is a perfect metaphor for the last 16 years. I have been tumbled by the currents and polished by the impact of their betrayal. A flock of gulls dives into the gray, churning water hunting for prey in the surf. I watch their synchronized descent. There is no triumphant orchestral music playing in the background of this life. There is no soaring cinematic crescendo to mark the end of the conflict. There is only the steady, enduring rhythm of the tide against the sand. The vast void they left in my chest when I was 15 years old is finally closed, not by their intervention, but by the work I did myself. I built a life that does not rely on their approval or their money, and that is the only foundation that can withstand a storm. I turn away from the ocean and walk back toward the parking lot where my 10-year-old Honda Civic sits waiting. As I reach for my keys, I see a black sedan parked 2 rows away. The driver's side door opens and a woman steps out. She looks familiar. I pause. It is Meredith, my father's daughter from his second marriage. She looks entirely different from the polished, poised version I remember from the few family dinners I was grudgingly allowed to attend. She wears a simple dark sweater and jeans. She does not look like a socialite. She looks like a woman who has spent the last several months staring into the abyss of her own family history. She walks toward me with hesitant steps. She stops 6 feet away and tucks her hands into her pockets. I have the documents, she says, her voice barely audible over the wind. The original ledgers my father thought were destroyed. They were in a safety deposit box that he forgot about during the asset seizure. I do not want them anymore. I do not want any part of their legacy. I look at the woman who spent years being introduced as the only daughter while I was the rough draft that got revised. I realize she is not here for a bribe. She is not here for a strategy. She is simply shedding the weight of a narrative that was never hers to begin with. She reaches into a bag she is carrying and holds out a thick folder. I take it. I do not look inside. I already know what it contains. She turns to leave but pauses one last time. You are the only one who is actually free, she says, before walking back to her car. I stand in the parking lot holding the final piece of the ledger as the black sedan pulls away and disappears into the mist. I built a structure that can hold anything they throw at it, and for the first time in my life, I am the one who gets to decide what we do with the truth. The quietest hour in any American home is usually 2 in the morning. The dishwasher has stopped its rhythmic hum, the headlights of passing cars have ceased sweeping across the living room walls, and the house settles into a profound, heavy stillness. It is in this specific unvarnished quiet that parents often lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of structure they have actually built for their children. We spend decades pouring our energy, our resources, and our anxieties into the architecture of our families. We obsess over the neighborhood, the school districts, the college funds, and the pristine appearance of the front lawn. But underneath the manicured hedges and the framed diplomas, a quiet crisis often brews in the foundation. We become so frantic to construct a flawless ballroom that we forget to inspect the load-bearing walls. There is a dangerous, seductive trap in modern society, the illusion of the performative family. We live in a culture that incessantly demands external validation, urging parents to treat their children as extensions of their own social equity. The bumper stickers, the elite university sweatshirts, the curated holiday cards, they all slowly, insidiously transform a child from a sovereign soul into a metric of parental success. When a parent's love becomes conditional on a child's compliance or achievement, the environment in the home shifts. The air grows thin and cold. The child begins to feel like a rough draft, a manuscript that requires constant revision to fit a parent's unfulfilled ambitions. They learn to read the slight tightening of a mother's jaw, or the disappointed silence of a father realizing that their worth is a commodity to be earned on a stage, rather than a birthright to be experienced in a sanctuary. True wisdom requires the agonizing courage to look at our children, warts, failures, and all, and practice radical acceptance. We must view them not as mirrors reflecting our own egos, but as entirely distinct individuals entrusted to our care. This brings us to the instinct to insulate. A parent's most primal urge is to shield their child from the harsh, biting winds of the world. We want to buy them a seat at the head table far away from the swinging kitchen doors and the drafty corridors. We strive to protect them from table 14, the modest, the uncomfortable, the spaces where the chairs don't quite match, and the light flickers. But wrapping a child in bubble wrap does not build armor. It only makes their skin softer. True resilience is never forged in the VIP section. It is cultivated in the quiet dignity of facing reality without a safety net. When we shield our children from struggle, we actively deny them the very friction required to build empathy, humility, and grit. A parent's greatest legacy is not handing a child a pristine, frictionless life. It is modeling the courage to stand in the center of an uncomfortable truth, maintaining equanimity when the applause stops. Consider the physical inheritance we leave behind. Estate planners and financial advisors deal in the arithmetic of trust funds, property deeds, and stock portfolios. Yet the most critical asset passed down to the next generation cannot be locked inside a bank vault. It is the moral inheritance. If a family's wealth or status is built on a foundation of ethical compromise, a stolen pension, a betrayed partner, a hollow lie, that structure is structurally doomed. You can paint the walls and polish the hardwood floors, but the rot is already in the timber. Children possess a terrifying silent intuition. They watch the spaces between our words. They notice when we demand honesty from them while compromising our own integrity to climb a social ladder. A legacy built on shortcuts leaves a child with a profound moral debt, a heavy, invisible mortgage they will eventually be forced to pay with their own conscience. Wisdom dictates that the structures we build for our young must be load-bearing. They must be constructed with the heavy, unglamorous materials of honesty, labor, and ethical consistency. This moral consistency redefines the very boundaries of the American family. We are conditioned to define our kin by shared last names, bloodlines, and holiday traditions. But a shared genetic code does not guarantee a safe harbor. True family is an energetic and moral alignment. Blood may put you in the same room, but it does not guarantee who will stay when the heat gets shut off. Family is not determined by who sits next to you at a lavish, catered country club reception. It is determined entirely by who shows up when the garage is freezing cold, when the bank accounts are empty, and when the world has turned its back. We must teach our children to evaluate their circles, not by the pedigree of the guests, but by their capacity for unvarnished kindness, their adherence to the truth, and their willingness to remain planted in the messy, uncurated realities of life. That quiet, steadfast loyalty is the only true freedom fund that will protect them in an unpredictable world. If you are navigating the complex, often heartbreaking landscape of family dynamics, or if you simply appreciate stories that strip away the superficial layers to reveal the raw timber underneath, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and follow Still Water Stories. Drop a comment below and share your own experiences. This channel is a space for those of us who recognize that the most profound lessons are rarely taught in the light, but rather in the quiet shadows of our shared histories. The sun will eventually rise on that quiet house at 2 a.m. The shadows will retreat, and the day will demand our energy once again. We will pour our coffee, pack the lunches, and walk out the front door, leaving the structure behind us. But walk out to your driveway, stop, and look back at the walls you are raising. Look past the fresh paint and the pristine landscaping. If a violent storm were to roll off the coast tomorrow, tearing the roof off and exposing the framework to the blinding light of day, what would be left standing in the rain? Did you spend your life desperately decorating a stage for the world to applaud, or did you do the quiet, invisible, back-breaking work of pouring a foundation that will hold your child steady long after you are gone? The answer is already written in the walls. You just have to be brave enough to look at the cracks.